Yeah, let's wait 2 minutes, and I think we can start because
if people join later, that's not a problem. So I guess we start. I hope
okay. Yep.
everybody can see the presentation. So on the full screen. My name is Carsten Graf. I'm the sales director from Cloudant for Central Europe and Eastern Europe. So I'm also covering Poland. And I would also like to introduce my colleague Roberto Tolini, who is the sales engineering director, pretty much covering the same region and leading the team, but also working very closely in the Eastern European part and taking care of the business. So what we would like to do is give you an overview why Cloudant is a perfect fit for MSPs. I would start with the 10-15 minute general overview, a little bit about the company and the market opportunity, and then Roberto will really go into deep technical use cases for MSPs. So with that, and as always, if you have any questions, I know you can't talk, but drop us a note in the chat, and then we will try to answer the questions, or also the marketing ladies from SoftProm can read out the questions. So keep it interactive as much as possible. So what we're addressing, what we see with service provider is actually a challenge. We see this a lot here in Germany, in Switzerland, and that AWS or Amazon Web Services is very aggressive. They got a lot of market share, Google, and the other ones also. So service provider had kind of a challenge to find their ways new. And that's where Cloudant ties in. We can offer service providers the possibility to build up a service model that we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about, and you can actually differentiate your services. You can bring a local service. It then allows you to increase your revenues and your margins and also expand your customer base. Before I go in detail, I'm just going to give you a short interview about Cloudant. Cloudant was established 2013, and what actually happened was NTT was our very first customer. We got them because they had some issues, and NTT was for the first 3 years our only customer, and we made the whole offering very scalable. We made it kind of especially for service provider. We put a billing API. We made it scalable to petabytes, exabytes, and millions of users. So our origin is service providers. We now have a lot of service providers. I will tell you that later, and we're funded by the largest companies of the world. So our main investor is Cisco Systems. Intel Capital is invested. NTT is still one of the large investors. Lenovo is an investor. So it's a very strong technology company, and that's where we're strong. And that's pretty much all I'm going to tell you about the company. So what we see is the market is really growing, and this is a combination. For a long time, it was mainly the big hyperscalers like AWS and Google growing, but we see a lot of service provider tapping into this market with what's called a private cloud, and there's a lot of different worlds out there, but what we call a private cloud is really that a service provider, smaller one, brings a local cloud, and that's the biggest revenue growth at the moment that we see, and the biggest market that we see also. So we see actually Amazon and others still growing significantly, but this private cloud, what service providers offer, is growing quite a lot more. So what we as Cloudant, and Roberto will tell you, it's all based from the beginning on S3. So we're in 100% S3 object storage. What you can do with that is it allows you to add a lot of value added services. So based on our servicing, most service providers start with a storage as a service. So you can offer an S3 service. And the idea is really to compete against the big AWS there. And then you can add other service like a backup service with Veeam. You can offer an archive service, or actually a big data service. So we see this a lot, that the service providers start with an S3 service, And then the next thing is like a backup service. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but it allows you to offer a whole suite of services. So what we're doing, and it's actually a simple model, is Cloudant is offering S3 object storage mainly for service provider and software only. So your costs to buy the services is normally about half or a third of the offerings that you have with Amazon or others. But you're relying on the same technology, the S3 protocol. And so you could offer the same offering like an AWS or a Google Cloud, and you can offer it with a lot of margin and put a lot of margin potential in there. And that's what we're currently seeing quite a lot. And I share a couple of use cases that we have a lot of service providers, MSPs that are offering the service, and you differentiate yourself with a lot of things. So you, for example, in Poland, you can say, I'm hosting all my data in a Polish data center. I do it in local language support. I do have all the documentation locally, and you can bring this marketing pitch, and at the same time, you still can price yourself below the big service providers like Amazon services. And that's what we see quite successful. And we allow you to do this, start very small and grow. But this is really the idea behind it, so you can compete and bring out a new service there. We have a lot of MSPs doing this at the moment. I'm just going to tap into a few ones. Dataline is one of the largest MSPs in Russia. So they offer the service completely on Cloudant. They started with Cloudant software as a service, and then offered a storage as a service, S3 service, offering some other services. And they also just build up a cloud based on Cloudant, based on VCP, the VMware service provider model. So you're open to do that. And they actually build up a consumption model there that they literally just pay what they need to us. Other service provider, I mentioned it before, NTT. NTT has it distributed all over the world in their data centers. They have over 1 million users now on Cloudant. So that's a typical service. They were our first customer. They're still a very large customer that is offering this as a managed service, as a cloud service provider to their customers worldwide. And the other one that I would like to mention is 101. 101 is the second largest MSP behind Deutsche Telekom in Germany. And the same thing there. They choose Cloudant because we have the most compatible S3 offering out there, and they're offering and service for their customers to compete with the likes of AWS or Deutsche Telekom. And it's a very big service, and they build it up from the beginning and offering it to their customers. So that's the market potential. So we have a lot of customers that build this in a big scale. So I'm just giving you a summary of examples that we have, but we have about 200 service providers worldwide that do this, and you can see it on the list. It's companies like T-Mobile doing this, but there's also other big names on there. Like Interout, they're doing this in 5 or 6 data centers. And it's always the same idea that you offer an S3 service to your customer and make a good margin and play the local card, to say. I think that's pretty much the idea on the concept. And with that, I would really turn it over to Roberto, who's going to talk more about Cloudant and the idea that you build up an S3 service. We have the most interoperable S3 API, so you can script a lot. We can start very small. Software only starts at 10 terabyte. We have programs like a free 50 program where you can try it. Appliances start with 120 terabyte, but normally in the service provider space, you're with software only, so you can start very small and you can scale then very easily, and you have all the billing function integrated. With that, I would actually turn it over to Roberto to go a little bit more into technical stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat, and we're more than happy to answer them. So I will stop sharing. So.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. Give me a second and I will share with you. Okay. Can you see my screen at the moment?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes,
okay.
we can.
So thank you. So I just follow up what Carsten introduced, and I will divide my part of the presentation in two segments. The first one is what we do, so which are our products. And the second part will be how we can turn these products into a service. So how we can help providers to deliver the service. So linking up to the examples of service providers that Carsten already gave you. So for the first part, we have three main solutions. Actually, the number one solution we have is called Hyperstore. And this is exactly what Carsten was mentioning, the S3 fully Amazon compatible scalable object storage. Okay, so Hyperstore is the foundation for every service you want to build as a provider. On top of that, we have other two products that we call them complementary because they complement, they complete the offer. One is called Hyperfile and is basically a component that allows you to present a file system in place of S3 to your clients wherever you need to have file system-based access to data. And then you have HyperIQ, that is our reporting and monitoring tool. So the mandatory product for building your service is Hyperstore. And then on top of that, if you need, you can build part of the service based on Hyperfile. And beside Hyperstore, you can also use HyperIQ to monitor and report, so to know how much space you are consuming, which are your transactions, the I/O, the disk usage, and so on and so forth. So that is our portfolio. Now, let's focus on Hyperstore. That is the most critical component in the portfolio. So Hyperstore is your S3 on premises. It's an object storage, is a cluster composed by a certain number of nodes. All these nodes together become your private cloud. You can start building, starting small. The minimum number of nodes we need is 3. And the reason is that we need to guarantee service availability and data protection. Service availability by having more nodes. So if one node will fail, the other nodes in the cluster can still deliver the service. And data protection as well is made by replicating the data in different ways on different nodes. We will get to this point in the next slide. As mentioned, you can start with a very small on-premises private cloud. You can extend this private cloud to multiple sites. So it's still your private cloud, but it's spread across multiple sites. But you can also interact with other providers. Namely, you can interact with the public providers like Microsoft Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform. There is a function called tiering in our solution that can move or copy data to another cloud. This for different purposes can be disaster recovery or can be just that you want to have a certain amount of your data locally and then you don't care about long-term data and you store them into a public cloud. But you can also use this technique. You, as a service provider, you are the public cloud. So you install Hyperstore, like many of the examples Carsten gave you are doing. You are the S3 endpoint, so you are the public cloud. And your customer has a part of the infrastructure on premises. So it will be cloud and Hyperstore to cloud and Hyperstore kind of theory. Okay. So these are the scenarios that basically you can cover. And the last one on the right is basically a summary of the previous two. So you can not only have your private cloud, but you can also interact with multiple clouds at the same time. Each entity, each logical entity called bucket, can replicate to a different cloud based on the customer needs. Now, let's spend a minute on data protection. I mentioned you build a cluster, so you need a certain number of nodes to build a service. One of the reasons why you have multiple nodes is to protect your data. And to protect your data, you have two techniques. that are general for all the object storage in the market. One is replication. So you replicate your data to another node. Example, you have 3 nodes, you make 3 copies of data, you lose 1 node, you still have 2 copies of data. You lose 2 nodes, you still have 1 copy of data, but you don't have the service because you need at least 2 nodes out of 3. So again, this trade-off between availability and data protection, you can modify that by adding nodes. You can make any kind of configuration that's good for your level of service and protection. And the second way to protect your data is to do erasure coding. Erasure coding is like to have a RAID, if you are familiar with classical storage, disk storage. Basically, you build your RAID in a software way. So you take your data, you create some chunks, you add some parity chunks, and then you spread this across multiple nodes. In this way, you can optimize your storage by having a more efficient way of storing data. In place of making 2, 3, 4 copies, you made 4 chunks of data and 2 of parity, so it's 1.5 times the capacity, and so on and so forth. And this can be as simple or as complex as you want by adding nodes, adding sites, and spreading the protection across multiple sites and multiple nodes. Now, that is the concept. How we can deploy Hyperstore. We have 2 options. One is we sell you the appliance. You get an appliance that is hardware, is an Intel-based server branded by Cloudant, and you have hardware and software. So you just deploy the appliances and you have your cluster up and running. But you also have the software-defined model. So in this case, you can use your own hardware or virtual machines. And this is a typical way to start if you want to have, for example, a pilot project to see how the market reacts. In place of buying the appliances, you just deploy the solution, software only, on what you already have. So you can make a trial with your customer and see if the service is good or not. And then in case you want to grow, you can add bigger nodes, you can add appliances, for example. Okay. So on the software-defined part, as mentioned, we have 2 ways to deploy. One is to deploy on virtual machines, VMware, for example, ES6i, or you can deploy on bare metal nodes. You just install Linux, CentOS, or Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And this is the operating system we use for deploying Hyperstore on top. Both models are available, and we don't have any priority, so you can choose freely what you want. What you could also do in some cases, if you are part of the VCPP program with VMware, you could also buy the software license through this channel, but it's only for providers that are part of the VCPP commercial program from VMware. If you have more questions on that, maybe Carsten can answer in the chat. Just a word about the appliances. As I mentioned, they are fully configured systems based on Intel x86 technology. And we have several models that are basically covering almost all the segments of the market, from the smaller ones that are 12 disks, all the way to the super big ones that are the Hyperstore Extreme you see at the bottom of the slide, that are pretty big, as 1.5 petabytes row space each. We also have an offer on all flash. All flash typically is used for some use cases where you need very fast I/O, and with data that is changing quite a lot. Of course, building a full cluster of all flash can become expensive, but you can use some flash nodes and then use tiering to move to standard disk nodes. So you can make this kind of combination based on your needs. As you can easily understand, large nodes are for mostly capacitive environments where you have a large amount of data that is kind of static. Smaller nodes are more suitable for I/O intensive environments, because smaller nodes gives you less capacity per node, but overall you get more performances on the cluster because you get more nodes. Okay. I will not show you too much about details about the appliances, but you can find the data sheet on our website. So feel free to have a look, and you download, you have all the specifications, and you can see how the appliances are done. Just as a note, if you want to build a system in a software only, the easiest way to do that is to take our appliances and build a similar node using your own preferred hardware vendor. Okay, so in terms of resources, CPU, disk, RAM, and networking. Of course, if you want to start smaller, you can also do smaller nodes, and this is completely open based on your needs. What we do normally, we sit down together and we make a sizing to find the right entry point for your needs. Okay, that's pretty much all about the how we deploy the product, so software and appliances. Now I want to spend the rest of this presentation about the use cases and solutions. So how we can create a service, and this is typically for service providers. Okay. So it's the summary of everything we can do with our solution. And the main point is that our solution, Hyperstore in this case, that can be with Hyperfile and HyperIQ, of course, if you want to add these components, is giving you the base platform. So you get the S3 as a service, S3 fully compatible storage. And then on top of that, you can build your own services that can be simple S3 storage. And when I say simple, don't take me wrong, it's just simple because it's the easiest use case to deploy. But then you can also use that for providing backup as a service or archive as a service. In this case, your infrastructure becomes the repository for backup tools. I just put some names on the slide because these are the names we work more often, but we also work with other backup vendors. So if they support Amazon S3, we guarantee that they will support also Cloudant Hyperstore S3. The difference between the other vendors and these vendors, that with some of these vendors, we also have further integration levels, namely, for example, the object lock integration for making your data immutable. And we have a slide on that in the next. So the concept is, you as a service provider, you build your own cloud. This cloud can be totally dedicated to a customer or shared across multiple customers. In this case, you get into the multi-tenancy concept. So you can create tenants. Each tenant is a customer. And then each tenant can also create sub-tenants, so end users. For example, you give 100 terabytes of space to the company Roberto, and Roberto can create its own users integrated with own Active Directory and use the space and the resources you allocate to that customer. So to do that, you can use multi-tenancy. So you isolate every tenant has its own resources. Then you can use quality of service, QoS in the slide, to define how many resources you can use. It can be terabytes, or it can be I/O per second or I/O per hours. And this is similar to the model used by Amazon. So first, with quality of service, you limit the amount of transactions, but you can also use this kind of metric to create a billing. So at the end of the month or at the end of the week, the system will produce for you a full report about how many gigabytes, how many objects, how many transactions, and you can associate that with the cost. So you can create a PDF invoice to give to your customer to pay for your services. It's very simple. It can be done in a very granular way. So for example, customer Roberto is using only a single copy, just an example of data in a single data center. So the cost per gigabyte is 1 zloty and per month. And then user Carsten is having 3 copies across 3 data centers. So it's a higher level of protection. And the cost is 1.5 zloty per month. Based on this cost that you put in the system, you can generate the bill, and each customer will have its own bill based on the service level that has been subscribed to. All the other use cases you see, all the other services you see here are based on this S3 as a service building block. And of course, to do them, we can use partner solutions, or just in case of file sharing, for example, we can use Hyperfile. that is a Cloudant solution. But there are many, many, many of them. Now, let's go into some of the examples. The first one, as I mentioned, the building block is a storage as a service, also S3 as a service. I already explained all the basic components, but you can see in these slides, they are all summarized. And again, the concept is you have your cloud, you create your tenants, you allocate space. These tenants can create other tenants. You can also create a reporting system, and then you can charge them for consumption per terabyte or per transaction. So you can do the exact same model as AWS is doing if you want. And if you look at some of the websites of the examples that Carsten gave before, like DataLine, iOS, you might find also web page where they really show you how they build, how they create the service and all the details. Can be also a good way to look at the reality, how to implement that. We have a few case studies. I don't go through that because it has been already mentioned by Carsten, but you can find these use cases on our website. So you have a few brochures showing what we do with these guys. The second and very easy use case to implement is data protection, or data protection as a service, or backup as a service, or archive as a service. There are many names for the same type of service. In this case, you still have your S3 as a service, your cloud. The difference is that you use a backup tool to back up your data, and then you use the cloud to store the data. There are many ways of doing that. For example, there are some software that, some backup software that go straight to S3. There are some backup software that have a landing space on disk, and then they use their own policies to move to S3. For example, Rubrik and Veeam, they can do backup on disk, and then they can put parameters that automatically move data or copy data from disk to tape after a certain amount of time, or when disk gets full. You can play with that as is very, very flexible. The base concept is that these tools just need an S3 endpoint. So you give them a URL, you give them some parameters, you give them some quality of service and some space, and that's all you have to do to run your backup as a service. The added value of using Hyperstore for backup as a service, for example, is that you can provide disaster recovery for them. So in place of doing DR, making 2 copies from Rubrik or for Veeam, then you make a single copy on the cloud, S3, and then the S3, so Hyperstore, will do the second copy for you on a remote site or on a public cloud or on another provider. And again, this provider can be you, and this on-premises can be Cloudant at the customer premises. Okay? One of the added value we offer with this backup as a service with some vendors, namely with Veeam, Commvault, but also Rubrik as something similar, is that they can leverage a special feature called object lock. That is basically the ability to lock the backup data that becomes immutable. Why that? For example, to protect you against ransomware. Ransomware, as you all know, is a kind of malware that installs on your system. And the more modern version of ransomware are able to lock not only the primary data, but they lock also the backup data. They want to prevent you to restore your data. To be able to get back your data, of course, you can protect yourself with every kind of anti-malware, antivirus you want. This will protect you, but will not protect you when the malware is already in your company. So in this case, you need to protect the data at storage level. And what we can do with Veeam, Commvault, with Rubrik, for example, is that they can lock the backup data for a certain amount of time. For example, 1 month or the whole life of the backup. So your backup data becomes immutable. They cannot be changed by any kind of malware or software that wants to make modifications. This is done by leveraging our object lock solution. And we have some white papers of integration with Commvault, with Veeam. There is also paper with Rubrik, so you can have a look and see what we can do. And this slide is showing you just a little bit more details about the data protection and object lock. Of course, we can also guarantee compliance with some rules and regulations if you need. If you don't need any compliance, you can use a simple lock that is, you don't have to configure the system in a certain way. You can be more flexible in what you do, but still protecting your data. Okay, so that was the second use case. Now let's spend a little bit of time on another important use case that is linked to the environments where you have VMware. So storage as a service, S3 as a service, backup as a service are general use case. In this specific use case, we target environments that have VMware, and specifically for some providers, VMware vCloud Director. vCloud Director is a tool to manage cloud resources for providers. So you can create tenants, you can create multi-tenancy, you can associate resources, VMs, blah, blah, blah. You probably know that. What we do is that we can connect our solution, our S3 solution, Hyperstore, to vCloud Director using a component called VOSC. That is a free component from VMware. VOSC is a virtual object storage extension. By doing that, we allow vCloud Director to manage not only VMware resources, but also S3 resources. Okay. So in your at the end of everything in your portal, what you see is that you will have a new tab in VCD, a tab called Object Storage, and by clicking on that, you can access a new menu, and you can allocate object storage resources for your VCD portal users. And it's totally integrated, and you can play and do whatever you want. This integration is a technical integration, so you don't need to have any contract with VMware. It's just based on standard Cloudant software or hardware and VMware VCD. Of course, if you are part of the VCPP program, that is another story, is a commercial program, you can also buy our license through VMware, but you don't have to. It's just one of the options you have to buy Cloudant resources. And that basically is a slide showing you what you can do inside your VCD portal. So you can create a bucket. Bucket is like a folder. If you think about file system, you can store virtual applications. You can create a catalog. You can do many things basically by managing all the S3 part directly through the VCD portal. And we have another integration with VMware. This is more recent. This is not linked to having vCloud Director, but it's more like a generic use case also for enterprise use. In this case, we provide S3 storage for vCenter and vSphere. What we do, basically, we can install the Cloudant Hyperstore natively into the VCD environment, sorry, the vSphere environment, and we can use vSAN storage as storage. So what we do, basically, we have our solution deployed in VMs, and then we use existing VMware storage as storage, and we present that as an S3. Is an alternative. So it's not the standard deployment of Hyperstore. Normally, you don't use appliances here. You use software only, and you use VMs to install the software. The characteristic is that you use vSAN resources. So vSAN typically is block storage. In this case, we will use vSAN block storage to be used by Cloudant Hyperstore, and then it will be translated into S3 storage for vSphere. If you want more information, we have a full documentation and a brochure and some white papers on our website. We'll be happy to share with you. We also support Kubernetes. Is another use case that can be used for typically DevOps environment. It's not really a service provider kind of target, but this could be also another use case. You just offer S3 storage for Kubernetes for DevOps environment. So in place of building complex storage, they can just give an S3 endpoint that can be in your infrastructure. So as a provider, S3 as a service, and the DevOps, the developers can easily provision this storage fully automated through the Kubernetes connector. Just spend a couple of minutes more about other use cases. One is the Splunk data archive. This can also be a use case for service providers. We see that more in the enterprise environment. And the concept is basically Splunk is a tool that is used very widely to analyze logs, to create reporting. Normally you install Splunk on very fast servers. It needs normally flash storage or high-end storage for what they call the indexers. So the indexers are the nodes that are making searches about all these logs, machine data, metadata, and all these kind of data sources. What we offer is that in place of installing everything on all flash, you use a smart store that is a Splunk component, and then you tier the warm or cold data into an S3 target. So you, as a provider, you provide the S3 target, and you allow the customer to take off a lot of data from the primary storage, so to drop the cost of that. And I think with that, I pretty much exhaust the use case. So I will be open for questions, or if you have any deeper technical questions you want me to answer, or if you have any other kind of question that you want Carsten to answer. I think we show you pretty much all we wanted to show you in this presentation.
Thank you so much, Carsten and Roberto. I will tell words in Polish.
Yep.
Bardzo dziękujemy Państwu za zalogowanie się i skorzystanie z możliwości uczestnictwa w naszym webinarium. No i chciałem powiedzieć, że można zadawać pytania przy pomocy czatu. I panowie Carsten i Roberto chętnie odpowiem na te pytania. Też po spotkaniu mamy nagrania tego webinarium, też wyślę linka z nagraniem, żeby można było sobie obejrzeć jeszcze raz. Ale czy, szanowni Państwo, czy są pytania do pana Roberto i pana Carstena? Rozumiem, że może po prezentacji, po obejrzeniu też jeszcze raz tego nagrania, może są jakieś pytania, się pojawią, pewnie się skontaktuję z Państwem. I think that there is no questions. It looks that there is no questions, maybe. And okay,
I mean,
maybe
literally, if you want to build like an S3 offering, any backup offering, if you want to do something like we showed with Veeam, Splunk, others, reach out to us or reach out to SoftProm, to your local contacts, and we're more than happy to do like a separate call, give you more detailed information, and just work with you on the use case. And what we always offer is free licenses for testing, so it's very easy to test. So if you have any of these topics, let us know, reach out, and we're more than happy to do a separate call, go more in detail. And thanks for the time. So have a great day, and thanks again for listening and for the webinar.
Dziękujemy bardzo Państwu. Chciałem też zaznaczyć, że w Polsce mamy zespół że też mamy osobę, która jest dedykowana do projektu Cloudant. To znaczy, że będziecie mieli Państwo wsparcie w całym zakresie wdrożenia i jak powiedział pan Karsten, są testy, darmowe testy, że można przetestować rozwiązanie. No, mam nadzieję, że się skontaktujemy i Państwo będziecie zainteresowani. Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you so much.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you so much. Okay, great. I wish you a great day, Karsten and Roberto, and no i życzę dobrego dnia naszym właśnie uczestnikom. Do usłyszenia, do zobaczenia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.